Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. Our guest today is Bertrand BADIE. Good afternoon.
Good
Bertrand BADIE is one of the most respected specialists of international relations here in France, professor at Sciences Po. And you just wrote La diplomatie de connivence, the conniving diplomacy. We'll come to your book in a minute. But first, obviously, this big announcement by the White House, by President Obama himself, that bin Laden has been shot. Bin Laden is dead. Bertrand BADIE, is the world safer today?
Well, I'm afraid probably not. I am so surprised to observe these very strong reactions among the political class, the ruling class, but also among the people who, for instance, were gathering around the White House. Of course, it's a very big and very important event. Of course, it's a very symbolic event. But how can we imagine that the death of one person, of one individual, is able to transform the world? And this is probably something very amazing. The superpower who had to fight against bin Laden, an individual, during 10 years.
But this only person, I'm sorry to interrupt, this only person, this only man was able to transform the world on the morning of September 2001.
Absolutely, because we are now entering in a new world in which the social actors and non-state actors are playing a very important role that they didn't play previously. International relations were shaped through the competition among 10 or even 6 states. And now we are moving to another world which is not really understood even by the ruling class. That's to say, a world in which the interstate competition is no more the most important feature. The most important feature is globalization. Behind globalization, you have something very interesting and fascinating, which is the eruption of societies on the international arena.
And was bin Laden a figure of this phenomenon of globalization? Was he a globalized
Well, I would
threat?
define bin Laden as a violence entrepreneur. That's to say, he tried to take benefits from all the social pathologies which were created through wrong development, underdevelopment, and this extraordinary and very deep suffering around the world. You know, we are now in a very strange world in which the market of sufferings, the market of underdevelopment is probably organizing the political competition and fueling the political roles on the international arena. And bin Laden was able to understand that he could fuel his role of violence entrepreneur by catching this suffering and by trying to be the holder on the international arena of this suffering. And so, is it possible to meet this kind of new entrepreneurs through the classical instrument of the international action, through weapons, classical weapons, and even through the nuclear weapons? Is the Clausewitzian war able to face this new situation? This is a strong break in our history of international relations. But the problem, as you said the question, is the death of one person able to interrupt this great transformation that our generation is observing.
In other words, he is dead, but not necessarily the unbalanced world that created him, and that and who is going to take over? Who's next? Will there be any successor to bin Laden?
He has successors. He has lieutenants. He has, we can observe through the news the formation and the growing up of new movements which are rather affiliated to Al-Qaeda and who accept bin Laden as the real leader, as the spiritual leaders. You remember, for instance, ACME was recently referring to bin Laden for justifying its own fight.
Al-Qaeda in Maghreb.
Al-Qaeda in Maghreb. And so there is now a kind of constellation which is probably organizing this violence market that I was defining. A market is never depending on one man. And probably, sure, the successors of bin Laden won't have the same charism that bin Laden had. And probably this is a good news for this reason. But, however, the problem is not the problem of the leader. The problem is the problem of the social roots of this situation.
Let's go back for a minute to these demonstrations in Washington, D.C. and New York last night. Is this a victory for America at last?
It's certainly a victory for Barack Obama. Remember, when Barack Obama challenged George W. Bush, it was precisely on this topic. That's to say, you didn't really target bin Laden and you scattered the military effort of the US around the world by fighting against Saddam Hussein and Iraq. And this was the wrong choice, the wrong option. I have to refocus our effort on bin Laden and AfPak. And so he was successful, as he was really the president who was able to get him. And this is a personal victory for Barack Obama. Is it a victory for the US? You consider that after 10 years, the superpower can consider that they really get a victory by catching, by arresting a man, by shooting a man?
Just one man. Let's go to your book now, The Conniving Diplomacy, where you kind of denounce the way the world is being ruled today with what you call this stubbornness of oligarchies. Why are they stubborn and who are those oligarchies? Basically, you're denouncing G20, G8. It's not working, is it?
Well, oligarchy is an old history in international relations, as it took place after the Vienna Congress in 1815. During all the 19th century, 5 states were ruling Europe, and through Europe were ruling the world. But even at this time, it was a difficult task and not a real success story. Now, are 5 or 8 or even 20 states able to rule the world? We are now in a global world, and in a global world, weak states are probably more determining of the new world order than the most powerful.
Because more determined themselves, because they do want what they know what they want more than the big countries?
Well, because the global world is depending on uncertainties. Uncertainty is probably the real dynamics of our global world. And uncertainties are coming from the poor, are coming from the unstable countries, from failed states, from suffering states, from underdeveloped countries. When you mention, for instance, the G20, G20 is covering about 85% of the gross national product in the world, but they are covering something like 1% of poverty, of suffering, of dangers inside the world. If we don't take into account these sources of danger, of collapsing, of violence, we are probably meeting failure.
But how do we do this? What is the good place, the good frame, the good structure to meet all these demands and these sufferings?
We know that. There is a word for that. It's multilateralism. But when US invented, Franklin Roosevelt invented multilateralism, this multilateralism was immediately corrupted as it was reconsidered through a comeback of oligarchy. This comeback of oligarchy was probably weakened by the strength of bipolarity. Bipolarity was ruling, and successfully ruling, the international system during the Cold War. But now there is a strong comeback of this oligarchy and a marginalization of the UN system. When this great Secretary General, Kofi Annan, tried to booster the multilateralism and UN system for covering all the challenging that we were meeting. But he was failing.
He was failing because he had to deal with US President George W. Bush, who wasn't very much in favor of multilateralism. Thank you so much, Bertrand BADIE. This book, The Conniving Diplomacy, soon to be translated in English, I hope?
I hope so.
We hope so. And for anybody who is interested about Bertrand BADIE's work, you can find it on the internet, of course. Thank you very much for stopping by at France 24. Stay with us. The news is next on the International Channel.